All right. I think we'll get started, Dana. If you want to introduce yourself and then
Sure.
go for it.
All right.
Got monkeys in my office.
Uh, so welcome everyone. So excited to be moderating the session today. I think it's going to be a great discussion. And today's topic is going to be inclusivity and STEM communication. And so what we'll do is I'll just run a few housekeeping items that Catherine wanted me to mention. And then I'll give a little welcome to our participants and start things off with some questions that I've prepared, and then encourage the participants in Catherine's program to take part in the discussion, put their questions to the presenters, and we'll have a chat about some communication strategies. So firstly, Catherine wanted to say that for those of you who are planning on creating a presentation for the Sharing Circle Symposium, either live or recorded, if they could connect with Catherine via email so she can help them plan for that. So just a reminder to the participants about that. So the Sharing Circle Symposium is on June 1st, and if you're planning on creating a presentation, live or recorded, give Catherine an email and she'll help you get sorted. So I'm Dr. Dana Mount, and I'm the Associate Dean of Research and Graduate Studies at CBU. I'm also a prof in the English department. So if any of you are students, I may have taught you in one of the intro English courses. And I'm also the co-director of the Bachelor of Arts and Science in Environment, which is a degree program at CBU. And we just had our first round of graduates, 4 awesome students. So I'm feeling good about that. One of the interesting things about the program is that we try and combine the arts and the sciences. And so this whole communicating your STEM story is really on point for what we're trying to do, because it's this idea that science is incredibly powerful, but it's how we communicate it and how we enact it in things like policy and culture that really takes what we've discovered and moves it forward and moves us forward. So I'm excited to be part of this and hear what people come up with at the end. And today we've got 3 panelists for this discussion, and I'll give them a really brief introduction, just a who's who, and then I'll put questions to them and let them introduce themselves a bit more fully. So we've got Steve Sutherland, who folks in Sydney know if they're smart enough to tune into the morning radio show Information Morning. And he's interviewed probably almost all of us at CBU, I would say. It's a real hallmark of arriving at the island to have found yourself on Steve's show. So I'm really happy to have him here today. We've also got Kimberly Gardner, who's new to a lot of us, but is not new to her YouTube fans. She's got a YouTube channel called Kimberly's Road to PhD, which is full of great tips and actual examples of science communication. And she's a student at Howard University. Very much looking forward to her contribution today. And then we've got Dr. Matthias Bjernstiel. Hi, Matthias, who is a colleague of mine at CBU. And he's a prof in the chemistry department, and he's working on some really interesting community-based projects that have expanded, I think he'd say, his comfort zone and introduced him to a lot of new ways of working with science and community. So that's the sort of who's who. And now I'll put the first question to Steve, and Steve, I'll ask you to introduce yourself as well as to give your response. So if in your video that you provided for this course, you go over the importance of covering the basics when communicating a story. And it's funny because I heard in your video the same questions you put to us when we're on your show. So I was like, I should have listened to this years ago. Is that sort of covering the basics an important element of making the audience feel connected and included?
Well, to start with the introduction, as you mentioned, Steve Sutherland, and for anybody who's not familiar with the program, it's a morning radio show. We do current affairs and interviews covering Cape Breton Island. And yes, if we haven't interviewed you yet and you're at CBU, we are working our way to you eventually. So be ready for that. And I've been in broadcasting for more than and have been hosting the morning radio show for about 14 or 15 years. So I'm coming at it from the perspective of someone who interviews scientists a lot, not as someone who's trained in communicating science ideas or even trained in public relations, frankly. I'm trained in getting at ideas, getting at information, and passing that information on. So just to clarify, that's the perspective I'm coming from. So you can take everything I say with that context with a grain of salt. And yeah, you know what, Dana, it's interesting when you say that you're asking you variations on those questions for sure over the years. I mean, I think interviewing is a social science, right? It's interesting that you've evolved into this interdisciplinary approach in your accessing the science and the arts, because journalism is one of the few generalist positions left. Like you throw a dart at the board every morning to talk about, see what you're going to be talking about. But the answer in an interview is the function of the question. And there's a process at uncovering information. And it's a basic process that actually reflects the scientific method to a certain extent and the kind of way you go about your research. That's just a slight aside. But to get at what you're talking about, one of the things I talked about in my little 3-minute spiel was considering ahead of time what a fresh audience needs to know about the work you're doing. And it's amazing to me how seldom, sometimes not just people in science stories, but generally people who are doing interviews don't consider one basic thing as why should anyone care? And I don't mean that in a cynical way. Matthias referred to it in a different way in his little 3-minute thing. It's like, why does this matter to people? Because you can get so caught up in your thing, especially if you're a specialist, especially if you're an expert, and you're looking at a very small part of the picture. But if you want to broaden that out to the audience, or more in a more mercenary sense, if you want to broaden it out to justifying why people should give you more money to continue with your research, you want to be able to communicate why it's important, how it's applicable, and what significance it has in people's lives. So if you give some thought to that ahead of time, I think it goes, you're on a good road to starting to communicate beyond just your specialty.
And do you find that that's really key to the audience buy-in? Like, will they commit to a story better if they feel like it has importance to them?
Obviously, yes. Yeah. You know, I mean, there's something, you know, to get interdisciplinary on you, Voltaire said, if you capture somebody's heart first, then you have their mind, which is also why I said my little thing, think about the cool part of what you did. You know, didn't you study litter once?
Yes.
Was it on shorelines?
Yeah,
was that...
beach cleanups and garbage. Yeah.
So first of all, the ocean and beach and shoreline, that's cool. The things you found are cool. And that's a weird approach to science and the arts, right? Like it's, so that just sprung to mind as a thing that was cool about that was it involved I can't remember exactly what the details were, but you involved art and science in an interdisciplinary way. And you did it through studying people's garbage and what they leave on the coastline and just the natural attachment that people have to beachcombing and what we find on the coast is an into that story. Everybody's done it. Everybody finds it cool to find something on the beach. Everybody's disgusted when they find those little elastics from the lobster pincers or bait bags or water bottle caps or motor oil, whatever. So that's cool, and that's the way you get people's attention. Then you can talk about the more boring stuff about why it's important and the message you're trying to get across. But if you captivate people, or the other way to say is, why should you care about this? For instance, some of the stuff that Shine was doing at the Verschuren Center. Why should you care about that? It's because it may someday make it easier to cure or treat cancer. That affects people's lives. So that's the in that particular thing. And if you want to talk about nuclear radiotides or whatever it is they're working on, that's your end to talk about it. So if you figure out the cool part or the part that affects people's lives, that's the way you make them care about what you have to say about it.
Yeah, and I guess from your point of view, it'd be interesting to hear, do your guests typically come to that realization on their own about what's cool or why people should care? Or is that something that you tend to have to bring them to in your sort of pre-discussions with them?
It can definitely, it varies with the guest. Yeah. There's definitely some revelations that happen when you're talking to people. And of course, there are different kinds of interviews. You know, when I was a reporter, when I used to do real work, you would have a long time to explore with somebody. You'd be off tape, maybe you'd be not even taping, and you'd have conversations with them where you get at the root of what they're doing. I do 5-minute quick friendships, 5-minute conversations where you're trained to kind of try to get at the gist or the basic nut of the idea as soon as you can. But sometimes you talk to people and you're like, maybe if you're live, they don't say it outright, but they're like, oh, that's what you were getting at. Oh, that's, or to them, it's like, and sometimes it's almost like a relief, that revelation.
Yes,
it's like, oh,
there is
that's
something
how I
interesting.
can communicate this. Because a lot of people, especially in very specialized fields, are like, how am I going to explain, like this morning, a doctor I was talking to, how do I explain the nature of false positives in rapid COVID-19 tests and how that is related to the frequency of COVID-19 in the community and how there's a relation between those two? That's really complicated. And so if you can help guide people to the bridge that gets them to the person that they're talking to, that happens. But people get lost. People get lost in the details of what they're doing, which is why, as Matthias said in his little 3-minute thing, don't forget to step back, step out of like the data, the chart, or whatever it is that you're lost in, and consider the way someone's seeing it from the outside. If you can do that before you start going about communicating it, then you're already a few steps ahead.
For sure. And I'm thinking of our participants and how we're inviting them, asking them to think about what's neat or what's cool about what they do, and how a practice interview with someone else could be the thing that ignites for them that realization.
And don't, move on when you have to the other people. But one thing I would say is, I cannot tell you how many times, Dana, it happens that you talk to somebody about a story and you turn off the microphone and then they tell you something really interesting. And then you're like, why didn't you say that as part of your elevator pitch? And it's amazing how many times that happens. Sometimes the thing that inspired you was the bay leaf in a dish. You want to get rid of that. That's not the important part. The important part is either the results, the cool process, the application, whatever. But sometimes that inspiration is the thing, and people kind of leave it behind. But the thing that you find most interesting, or that if you're in the lineup in Sobeys and somebody said, what was that litter thing you did, Dana? And you're like, well, here's what it was, is you're getting a Visa card or whatever. Sometimes that's the way to focus in on what the entry point is for people.
And even now I'm at a loss to what was it or how to communicate that thing that was fun about it back then. So yeah, I guess we need rehearsal in this constantly, because you get in the details. And as the researcher, you get sometimes fixated in what didn't work or what outcome didn't come from it. And that's not what you want to put your foot forward on communicating.
I can tell you too that science writing sucks when it comes to communicating with actual living, breathing people who aren't in your field, right? So a technique we use in broadcast when you're trying to communicate an idea, like if I'm asked to give a presentation, when I was in the beginning of my career, I used to sit down and write it. Now I stand up and talk it, or I say it to myself on the mountain bike, or I do it while I'm driving. And later I write notes if I have to, because the way you speak is the way the ideas come out. And you tend to forget when you're speaking the boring details. You can always add context later, or you can add the evidence that supports what you're saying. But if you're thinking about how what you're saying is being received, that will come to mind. You rely on your mind, you know what you know. And the important parts, the little stepping stones to get you over to the other shore to meet the person who's receiving the information, are going to come naturally. If there are a few gaps there that you forgot to fill in, well, you can go back to that later. So I would say if you're starting to write something or think about communicating something, you mentioned doing a practice interview. Maybe that's one strategy. Maybe another one is to bore your spouse over supper with it. Or maybe another one is to talk to yourself in the car. Probably the worst thing you can do to effectively communicate an idea is to sit down and try to write it first.
Oh, the English prof in me is just dying. But yes, speechify while you shower. I'm gonna write that note down.
There you go.
Thanks, Steve. Let's introduce Kimberly next. Kimberly, if you want to give yourself a bit of an introduction, and then I'll put a question to you to start us off. We can't hear you. Try again.
Hello, everyone. I want to double check if everyone can hear me.
We can.
Okay, great. I'm using the audio on my phone and my video is on my computer. Okay, great. Okay, so hi, everyone. My name is Kimberly Gardner. I am a senior at Howard University. I major in nutritional sciences, minor in chemistry, and I have a concentration in dietetics. I was the co-organizer of the Jersey City's Americans with Disabilities Act 30th virtual festival. We learned a lot about how to make things on virtual platform accessible, and I'm really happy to be here today.
Awesome. Thanks for that. And you've been an award winner too at events focusing on diversity in science. And you've focused a lot on looking at accessibility in communication. And I know I didn't go ahead and put the text at the bottom of my PowerPoint. And I'm just thinking about if you could sort of talk to us about what are some easy ways in to make the highest impact in terms of making your work and your communication strategies accessible, and why that's so important.
Thank you so much for your question. I think the broadest answer I can give is starting out with empathy. I think once we all look at it from that point of view, like, can this person hear me? Can this person see what I have to say, present as well? Can they understand the jargon that I'm using? Is English their native language? Once we start off with those concepts, it's a lot easier to make accessibility stay at the forefront of our brains. So, for example, I'm going to start with this Teams meeting. At the top of your screen, if you're on a computer, there's an ellipses button, and you can click live CC captions. And it will literally translate in real time what I'm saying in English. So overall, when it comes to empathy and communication and accessibility, you want to make the experience as best for that person as possible. So I'm going to start off with alternative text. It's when you describe an image briefly or as in depth as you'd like to make sure that anyone who's using a phone or a computer who also has a screen reader is able to understand what the picture is about without actually seeing it. For example, my former boss lived with low vision, and I had to describe every picture that I posted on her Instagram page as a social media manager for art access accessibility. And so next I want to talk about closed captioning. So that's really helpful for anyone in the deaf community in particular, but also a lot of people now, when they're watching videos on their phones, if you care about social media engagement, it is said that the majority of people watch things without audio. So like maybe they're in a meeting and they're distracted, or they're like lying in bed and they don't want to wake up their partner. It's very accessible that way as well when you just add the captions. It really opens the arena to a broader audience. And then there's also ASL interpretation. I'm not sure what the Canadian version is, but I do understand that when a lot of our public figures do give speeches, like our mayors, they always have an ASL interpreter there. And so I have pitched at a lot of conferences to make sure that if you're giving an opening keynote or a closing plenary, that you honestly don't know who's in the audience who has trouble hearing. And also with the Americans with Disabilities Act, they are not required to disclose that information. And so to just make sure that it's as accessible as possible, you should hire an ASL interpreter for that hour that you'll be speaking. Actually, the US law is that you have to hire two
Wow.
because they switch off every 15 minutes. And so the next thing I want to talk about is translation. And I feel as though Canada is the best example of this because I believe French is also like really popular there. And is it the law to have things translating in both?
The law is specific about which things have to be translated, like federal or provincial documents, and it could be a bit different in different provinces as well.
Okay, thank you so much for that clarification. Well, in the US, I would say the majority of everything is English. And I know that now, especially in healthcare, they're really branching into getting things translated in Spanish and Arabic. So
Okay.
again, we're just thinking about how does that empathy be can it be at the forefront so that we can make sure that this person is able to understand what we're trying to communicate, whether that's from a healthcare point of view, your research point of view, or just something on TV. And then lastly, I want to just talk about translation. Oh, actually, I think I covered that. So yeah, those are my answers. Thank you.
That's great. I'm really interested in the social media landscape. I think for a lot of us, we think that social media and the internet has made knowledge so much more accessible and so much easier to translate and transmit. But would you say sort of how far does the social media landscape have to go still to be really accessible? Is it headed in the right direction? Are there great strides in accessibility in those platforms, or is it still focused on people who have, you know, the typical access to hearing and visual abilities?
That is a great question. I definitely want to say that we do live in an able-bodied world. Ableism is at the forefront of everything we do, whether or not we want to accept that. I do want to say that I'm going to use YouTube for an example. Last year, there was a petition to keep closed captioning on YouTube because they were going to take it away in September of 2020. And then last week, April of 2021, they are making subtitles personal now. Like you yourself can upload subtitles. It's a new feature, and so I say definitely being able to um, state why it's important and to keep on fighting for those rights, whether it's on social media or in real life, it does make a big impact. I believe that iPhones and most Apple products are, I believe, the most accessible technology so far. I use the voiceover feature, and that helps me see whether a celebrity or somebody who claims to be accessible does use alternative text. So I'd say it's getting there. It's not 100% there yet, but we are making strides in this field.
Great. So you're a bit of a watchdog out there, are you then?
Yes,
Very
I
cool.
last year I had to be for my job.
Wow, that's interesting and great to know that there are people out there doing those scans. It might help encourage those of us who have been a bit lazy or taken advantage of their ableism to not make those differences. Thanks for those tips. That was super.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Matthias, would you like to introduce yourself and then I'll put a question to you as well?
Sure. I'm Dr. Matthias Bierenstiel, and I'm a chemist at Cape Breton University. I'm broadcasting out of my office, my kitchen, and my lab. And just there are also 2 dogs that are currently sleeping, and 3 cats, and 2 kids that are in their rooms right now studying with the classes. So there may be some traffic behind me, but it's all fine. So that's what we have there. And I extra cleaned it. That's actually a good, nice thing too about working out of your kitchen. You're forced to clean when you're online then. My research, I have a quite diverse field of research, and my main project that I'm working currently is with my co-PI Duma Young, and it's a birch bark project. It's currently the largest CIHR tri-agency grant at CBU, and we're exploring a rediscovery of a Mi'kmaq medicine. And that's how I kind of joined. It's based on two-eyed seeing process where we combine indigenous knowledge with Western science. And my part is the chemistry to Western science. And that's how I kind of stumbled upon this and researched this. And this is where I was now forced upon into inclusion and community research. Just by this happenstance, but it's really a joy and working with the community. So that's kind of the setting right now.
Yeah, and so I was wondering if you could maybe speak to some of the lessons you've learned along the way of what communication looks like when you're communicating with community, especially, in the context of some of the bigger histories between science and Indigenous communities in Canada, and just some of the lessons you've learned along the way, and what some of the important facets for people to keep in mind are.
Oh yeah, it's certainly a complex topic, and it has multiple viewpoints to that. So I'll focus on a few. One is it's not just general Indigenous community, but community itself. It's the communication aspect, and kind of as Steve pointed out as well, you have to kind of know kind of the audience and kind of go back and forth. But what I have learned more about this is actually, and this is part what I want to present here with the science communication skill workshop, is really the reflective piece. So communication is really a two-way street. It's not just like, hey, I or my researchers have done this in the lab, now you listen and just take it. Clearly there is this direction of information flow. But what I found more interesting is really the information flow backwards, in terms of what questions are the audience members asking. And clearly then it becomes interesting by really then saying, well, wait a second, if they asked this question, why did they ask that question? One could be that, oh, I've never really thought about that, or we actually thought about it, but I just haven't really properly connected and properly disseminated that. Similar to what Steve then as well said, sometimes there's kind of these really cool things are not in the narrative, but really kind of outside the narrative and in non-chronological order, that you will find, and recognizing all that is really important. And so that's, I think, my biggest takeaway there is listen to the audience, listen to kind of their feedback, and then adopt that approach, because we get obsessed by details, because that's by our nature. We need to find things and whatever, but then the bigger pictures are really important. And so let's not lose the forest for all the trees. And so that's very interesting. What we in this particular grant project that we're doing, and I have to say this is because of Duma. So I was associated with him because he was kind of with the community there. But it's listening to the stories, to the elders, and then translating that into research. So one big aspect was this birch bark oil, musqueomin, is made in a campfire process. What is the process? What's going on? And by listening to the stories, we can kind of learn and translate that back. And I think, and this is kind of the second way of kind of that two-way street of communication, is by really kind of learning what's there. And it's really kind of an active back and forth. We call it awakening of the knowledge, and it's really wonderful that way, because the knowledge grows in layers, and I have learned a lot about that too.
Yeah, I love that emphasis on the two-way street, and I'm thinking in particular about the issues that Kimberly's raising, that if your project was so enriched by what you heard back from an audience that you had to reach out to in a specific way, who are we losing when we're not being accessible in our general communication? That feedback you guys got is so important. So another sort of impetus to making work accessible, making communication accessible, is that we don't want to miss any input from any communities by virtue of a way that we've locked them out because of poor communication, poor accessibility.
Yeah, and then also like simply, kind of from a science perspective, I heard it a lot when we talk to a general audience. People use the term, dumbing down or generalizing. And that's such a poor choice of word, kind of, because
Yes.
It's not the way, it's a different way to communicate it. It's kind of putting it really in, it's not a dumb or smart thing what someone does in a lab or, kind of there. It's really the level of detail. And so it comes back to the question there. Clearly, non-experts, if I talk, to non-experts, they don't understand, what solvents are we using, and they don't really care,
Yeah.
because it's not relevant. Clearly, for the experiments, it's relevant because
Yeah.
if I use acetone or ethanol, it really makes a difference.
Yeah.
But what the gist is really by saying we find a certain process and we use certain techniques. And then we need to explain why do we use one over the other, and bringing that back into a story is really good. And coming back as well from kind of the overall thing with regards to your initial question about working with indigenous communities. What I have learned, I mean, this is what I have learned there is a lot of thing with the Mi'kmaq community is it's about stories, and really it's not only particular to the Mi'kmaq people, but it's really kind of very human. It's all about the story.
That's right.
And a research text is a story. Kind of, it has a beginning, it has a middle part, it has an end, and so linking all this together is really relevant, and that's what is enriching.
For sure. I'm going to let Kimberly put a question to you, but I'm also going to let the group know, all the participants, feel free to put your hand up or join into the discussion at this point. We'd love to hear from you. Yeah, Kimberly, did you want to pose your question to Matthias?
Yeah, sure. How does the social science research method of interviewing affect the efficacy of the in-lab experiments?
So what we have here, I actually can show this one here. It's not here. It's we made this oil and put it in a soap, and so people are using soap and creams in this Mi'kmaq medicine on their skin. And so a particular example would be our science aspect is kind of, what does it do and how does it do it? Kind of, how does it work and what is it useful for? And we have now Research Ethics Board approval, Mi'kmaq Ethics Watch approval as well, and that's on collecting these stories. And that actually helps, because some people then say, oh, I used it. I had an acne outbreak. I washed my face and the next day it was gone. Someone then said, oh, I had a sunburn last summer and I washed, and I used a cream and it was gone the next day. And so then we kind of say like, oh, wait a second, isn't that interesting? Why would that work? And then we can combine this. Our initial experiments was about antibiotic, and in fact, we have preliminary evidence this is a broad spectrum antibiotic. And so you can think about, what about secondary infections on skin? And now what Steve alluded there as well is people coming back as anti-itch, and which probably soothes the skin, and therefore it gives the body time to heal, which is interesting for me, because how do I test for anti-itch in the lab for that? And that might be really the biggest point, but that was something that we never thought about. We thought about there's a whole stuff of properties, anti-inflammatory, analgesic, antibiotic, antimicrobial, but we never really thought about anti-itch, and I think that soothing part might be good. And so we kind of need to rejig all this, because I think it's a really important aspect to that. So that's kind of what directly involved in our research, is really kind of what are other people experiencing, and kind of now this is my job as a researcher. How do I translate that into actual scientific experiments?
Thank you.
Catherine's posted a question to the group, a question about EDI, which equity, diversity, and inclusion. What do the panelists think is the best way to challenge or improve equity and diversity issues in the field of STEM?
I should add that, using communication, because that was a really broad question. So to focus it back on communication in science, but how, what should we try to be emphasizing or improving using communication?
Steve, yeah.
There, I was trying to lower my hand. I think Matthias makes a really good point to build on, which also built on Kimberly's point, which is to consider who you're excluding in your messages. And it's something we've considered at the CBC, for instance, in recent years with the attention given to reconciliation and the Idle No More movement and the consistent and chronic inability of us in the mainstream to meet the needs of people in those communities. And if you're not valuing the stories, and if you're not including those communities in the conversation, and if most importantly, they don't hear themselves in the conversation, why should they give you the time of day? And if they're not giving you the time of day, then you're not really covering or informing your community because you're leaving out a huge chunk of that community. I say this as someone who is perhaps not aware enough, but very aware of our failure to do right by those communities and many others over the years. And so I think as a communicator, I'm not sure if this is getting exactly at what Catherine was asking about, but I try to be conscious of who I'm excluding. And one simple thing that I try to do when I'm on the air is be positive, not in a Pollyanna kind of, hey, everything's wonderful kind of way, because not everything is. But the idea is I try not to, as a radio host, for instance, I try not to convey distaste or dislike for something. And I try to be open to receiving things, right? Maybe not as much as I am in my daily life, where sometimes cynicism comes out or skepticism comes out or a sense of irony comes out a little more, because you don't want to give people a reason to block out the information that you're trying to curate for them. You're really a medium through which people are receiving a message. And I think that works as well for people who are trying to communicate a message about science and trying to work within science. So, one thing that's cool about what Matthias and what Duma are doing, and I've interviewed them about it, as it may not surprise you to know, besides the fact that what they're doing is taking traditional ecological knowledge, monetizing it, and doing that in a way that can possibly assist the Indigenous community with their participation. But something they're doing that's cool is like, whoa, this thing that people have done for thousands of years is true. And, the people who have used it are probably like, yeah, right, that's why we've been doing it. But that's the idea of two-eyed seeing, which is finally having the Western way of knowing things, where you can actually identify the compound, isolate the compound in a way, and use that material in a way that was not possible necessarily in the same way to commercialize it from the traditional knowledge. But what's cool about that is saying, well, here is the underlying explanation for why that worked. Everybody knew it worked. You didn't know exactly how.
You're muted,
Did we all
Steve.
get muted?
Yeah, it's all good.
Okay.
We're back. So anyway, that was probably a good time to mute me, because I had kind of reached the end of that train. So the idea being, if you value that information and you're open to whoever might be in your audience, they feel valued and welcomed and not excluded, to get to some of Kimberly's points, then you're going to more effectively communicate your ideas.
Yeah, and such a unique opportunity, the way the CBC stands as this sort of nation-building communicator, to represent that inclusivity and that empathy in a significant way, like you said, making sure communities hear themselves in your stories. I'll put the next question to Kimberly. Melissa, who's an instructor with us, says, what are some strategies for communicating to a broad range of expertise? For instance, when we're teaching, we might think that we're teaching to a core of, say, English students, but I also get some hospitality and tourism management students in my class as well, or some international students come to our classes with full degrees already, and they seem to be, so full of knowledge and expertise already. So what advice would you give for teaching to a broad range of or communicating to a broad range of people?
Thank you for your question. I believe Steve touched on this point earlier. It's honestly just, what do you want them to leave with? And try to make the jargon as simple as possible, and to make sure that you're covering all of the bases. And I hope that answers your question. Thank you. Oh, and
Thank you.
Allison, I'm writing the answer in the chat.
Awesome. I love this new format for meetings where we're all doing all things, but I'm trying to keep up with the chat too. Jason has a question. I'm curious about strategies for dealing with hostile audiences. Been there, especially where hostility is justified. For example, African American vaccine hesitancy is informed by a brutal history of abuse and neglect by the medical establishment. Same is true for indigenous populations and archaeology, as well as medicine, I'd say. Republicans are rightfully skeptical that some activists are trying to slip broad progressive policy initiatives into climate change efforts, etc. Okay, so he gives us a few examples of communicating to a hostile audience. Do any of our panelists have any tips or notes from experience on that front?
I think, well, if I may say to this one there, I think those are broad topics and broad areas. So I think there's not a one size fits all approach, particularly if you're with the audience, kind of once, or if you're repeatedly with the audience. I think if you're repeated, there is gaining the trust. I think that's very important, and showing respect and going back and forth. One thing that we have done with Duma and I, and that was a few years back in our very first small research grant that built on this Birch Bark project. At that point, it was exploratory in nature, and we collected the stories that the elders had, but we built this into our grant that it was told to a community liaison person, and the PIs were not involved. Only if the community allows us to know about these stories, we will get that. And then the community will decide what they do with the stories. Because normally when you have the information out, then the information is out. And in fact, at that time, the community actually decided, no, we don't want to share and want to take that further. So as a researcher, it was kind of, oh, here are some publications that are not published. But it was very important because that led now to a much bigger grant and the bigger project. Because now over the years, and Tuma can attest to that, it was viewed very negatively and poorly as saying, the community basically said, we don't want to disseminate the knowledge because other people are stealing our knowledge and we're not benefiting from that, particularly with regards to commercialization. And now it's completely the opposite by saying, yes, we actually support that. However, the community needs to benefit from that. So this is kind of this trust building, and that can take a long time. Like, I'm on this project now for 8 years, so it's really a long time, a long process. So it's really getting that trust step by step. That's what I could contribute to that.
Thanks, Matthias. Yeah, and one interesting thing I've heard sort of behind the scenes is researchers advocating for granting agencies to recognize the time frame that trust building takes, and to build that into the timeline available in your grant. So it's not you get money and you have to start right away with results, but you can start with some money and start building those community relations, and then actioning the project. If I could respond as well, as I want to highlight something I was trying to communicate in my video, which was not 3 minutes nor a video, but I tried. The idea of sort of one of the courses that I teach at CBU is Indigenous literature. And so I'm always thinking about this idea of trust and knowledge and communication, and whether I am or probably am not the right person to teach that course. And so I was trying to talk about having this balance between acknowledging past harms and acknowledging the imperfection of the system, for instance, me teaching this course, but also still moving forward. and not risking making it about yourself. I think the first time I taught the course, I spent maybe 20 minutes at the beginning of the class saying that I was the wrong person to do this, and that I wasn't sure what I could contribute. And after 20 minutes, someone put their hand up and said, "Are you the teacher, miss?" And I was like, Yes, I'm the teacher. Let's move forward." So I made the mistake of making it about myself in that instance of communication, and that's what I was trying to convey in mine. And what I think, Jason, is what I think of when I think of speaking to a hostile, or in a tense communication thing, is to strike that balance well. Yeah, that comes back to me every time that I teach the course again. So that's what I would add. There's some good talk about I see with Kimberly and Hannah. Did you want to just reiterate any of those strategies, Kimberly, to the group?
Yes, sure. Thank you. I'm actually typing it right now, so I'll just read from it. So Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, websites, and PowerPoint with images have the alt text option. On Twitter, they give you the option to describe the image before posting. You can't do it after posting. But on Facebook and Instagram, it's possible to add image description after posting by clicking on the ellipses and then looking at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. If these options are hard to find, writing out the description in the caption will help as well, because the screen reader on phones and computers will read that to the person as well. And actually, that's the best way to start, because other people who are not looking for alt text will see that, oh, this person is describing their image in the actual post. And whereas as alt text, it's hidden, you wouldn't know it's there unless you have a screen reader. So it makes it more visible. And so maybe that will help someone say, oh, maybe I should be describing my images as well. And there are, well, in the US at least, there are compliance regulations for public websites. Like every image, every graph needs to have alt text.
Oh, that's interesting. We are definitely, I'm not aware of anything like that that we're responsible for at the compliance level. Is anyone? No. Steve, I'm thinking of your medium, the radio, which has such a singular form as well, right? It is audio. Is there, what do you guys think about when you think of the accessibility of your message?
To be perfectly honest, when we consider accessibility and inclusivity these days, we're thinking about representation. We're thinking about representation in our stories and in our audience. And certainly, I've as you've readily admitted, we regularly fall short on social media in making the posts accessible in the ways that Kimberly is describing. And certainly that's another way to exclude your audience in a medium that is so integral to every kind of communication these days. But when we think about inclusiveness and diversity at the CBC these days, we're thinking about the stories we do, the people represented in those stories, and the people telling them. Yeah. So in the way that you talked about your sense of guilt being a teacher trying to teach Indigenous literature, given your cultural background, I think it might be fair to say that the time for people who come from my background to be monopolizing the airwaves is long since past. But it is, it's a step to start recognizing that. And when we did a couple of years ago, we did a project that we called Explorations in Unama'ki, where we said, you know what, I was always interested in just going in some community with no predetermined or prescriptive sense of what we were supposed to accomplish there and just listen. So kind of a way to just get CBC to subsidize exploring the island, really. But when the Reconciliation Commission released its report, we said, you know what, we have failed. We are failing. We actively fail, both nationally and here. Let's admit that and accept that and realize that if you go into a First Nations community when someone has been hurt, or when there's unrest, and make people feel uncomfortable. Not to say those things are not legitimate stories, but if that's when they see you most,
That's right.
why should they embrace you when you want to tell a different kind of story? So we tried to go in these. So basically, we spent a day in each First Nations community in Cape Breton.
Yeah.
And it was me and my producer, Nicole, and we just went. And the idea was like, for a change, we're just going to try to receive stories instead of take them. I don't know if that makes it clear what the difference is there. So instead of like us being in a story meeting saying, hey, Dane is doing this cool thing, and Matthias is doing this cool thing with Birch Park, let's talk to Matthias about that, and let's talk to Doom about that, and here's why it's cool, and then we'll do it in an 8-minute interview tomorrow morning. So instead of us sitting around deciding from our closed center what the stories might be, we went out with a perfectly open, we followed our noses there. We kind of recruited people in each community that we knew and that understood where we were coming from, who could connect us with people in those communities. And instead of going to take stories, we went to just listen. And even as I was an interviewer, because I'm used to as a host live and radio, trying to be like, okay, I got to get out of here in 7 minutes. We have to have a story arc before that 7 minutes is over. You have to have exposition, conflict. You have some sort of resolution. You know what I mean? Very linear. And your mind's always thinking that, I'm sure as a scientist as well, your mind is thinking, how do I organize this information, make it understandable, make it relevant? How do I curate this information? It's like, that's not my job here today. My job is to learn here and just shut up and listen and not try to organize someone else's information for them. And we ended up coming home from that series with like 80 interviews. So we were kind of like, we weren't going to do really like interviews and say, we don't feel like we have to come back with something. So in that way, that was like a small step towards like, we're interested in any and all of what you have to say. So maybe you start to build a relationship in a way that the next time you come knocking or come calling, it's not like, oh, the harbingers of, ill news again.
That's right. That's right. Oh, that's a lovely story and a great depiction of it. I put a little note there. I'm trying to gather some of the themes from today and thinking about empathy, trust, and reception. And I think we've focused on the interesting thing about focusing on the audience is that you really have to focus on yourself and what you bring to the audience is what I'm hearing from folks, and the sort of openness and the attitude to which you bring it. But then there are real technical things that can enable that communication to feel more accessible and more inclusive as well. Are there any final questions from the participants out there? Anything that you want to make sure gets covered in our last 5 minutes? I feel like having had these conversations, I want to definitely review everyone's videos again now. Debbie, you have one.
I do. It's not a question, it's just more of a comment. We were talking about including your audience, and I see Hannah made a comment about the federal requirements for alt text and so on. A number of years ago, I worked for the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency, and we held review panel hearings. So one of the requirements was for us to provide access to those presentations in both official languages. So we had this huge, complicated setup with a translator in a translating booth. And if somebody wanted to come in and listen to the presentations in French, they would have to give their driver's license, and they would get a headset, and the translator, they could flick it on the channel so they could hear it in French. So anyway, this is in Sydney. Aging population and so on. So I walk into the room and I say, wow, are all these people listening in French? All the people were not listening in French. Nobody was listening in French. However, an aging population means that people certainly appreciated the headset because they could hear, they could control the volume and turn it up.
Yeah.
So giving specific consideration to your audience, you're meeting your requirements. Yes, it's federal, so this is official language and so on. But giving some more finite consideration to the characteristics of your audience. So we certainly didn't anticipate that we would be meeting that need of the older population, and maybe they can't hear so well. But yeah, considering the specifics of where your presentation is being given is certainly something to think about.
That's a great point, Debbie, and a really sort of fortuitous way that you ended up providing accessibility to a group that needed it. It makes me think of an essay that was circulating a few years ago against that whole "I don't need a mic" kind of stance that a lot of us speakers take. When we're used to projecting to a whole lecture hall full of people, we're often the ones who get to the meeting and say, "Oh, I don't need a mic, I can project." And how that really is a way of putting off people for whom it's so much easier for them to hear and be part of the listening if you are properly mic'd with the proper speaker, and that it's not fun for people to strain or to hear you shouting as much as it is for them to listen to something that's just properly set up to deliver sound. I see Catherine put down what not to do, but I fear that would take us wildly out of time. I know mine would. Jason's got a recommendation here. Catherine Heo, a Canadian climate scientist, and they do a lot of outreach. I feel like there's a lot of great links coming in the chat today. But I will wrap it up because I always like to be a good timekeeper and keep us within our time. I want to say thank you to Kimberly, who's come the farthest for us today to join us in this conversation. It's great to chat locally, but it's so wonderful to have other perspectives and to hear what's happening elsewhere. So thanks for bringing in your expertise today. And thanks, of course, to Steve and Matthias and for Catherine for organizing it and for everyone for their questions and chat. I hope this chat will be preserved in this group so people can go back to it. Thanks all. Have a great afternoon.